Hello, welcome to Three Men in a Boat. My name's Dan Elkington. I'm a financial planner and politically a pragmatist.
Alex Keenan, and I'm a solicitor and notary public, working mostly for farmers, and I am a bit of a liberal lefty.
My name is Mike Gilbert, and I'm a local volunteer doing practical work around the town. I'm also what you might call a political pamphleteer in the 18th century sense of the term.
And you're also a local councillor.
And I'm also a local councillor, yeah.
And a bit right-wing.
And I'm told that I'm a little bit right-wing.
Well, people who are right-wing always deny they're right-wing.
Do they?
Yeah, passe Joe Rogan.
Well, I would actually class myself as a right-wing Marxist, if you want to sort of nail it down very specifically.
Oh. Right.
Which is very, very strange, isn't it, for most people to kind of get their heads around. But essentially, I'm a small state socialist.
A small state socialist?
Yes, I don't like the idea of big states taking control of people's lives. I like the idea of trying to minimise the size of the state and maximise the influence of the people or the public.
So you're voting Andy Burnham then, I guess?
I guess not, actually.
You guess not?
No, I guess not.
But he's the only candidate promising.
I know, he wants
to... if he becomes leader of the Labour
he wants
Party,
to move. He wants to sort of do a sort of a European Union thing where he moves the centre of, he moves number 10
he wants to
north to south.
Subsidiarity into our system of governance, which is that European thing of delegate it to the lowest possible level.
Well, that's what he says he wants to do. But of course, the whip hand will always be held by Westminster, whether it's in Westminster or Manchester.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I do.
Because I think that there are...
These models don't work, in my opinion.
But if you look at like America, for instance, like Washington D.C. is the political capital, as it were, but it's by no means the financial capital of America. It's also kind of like the legal. Yeah, I mean, New York or California, Texas. I mean, these are all like big financial centers. I mean, New York's obviously where the stock exchange, where one of the biggest stock exchanges is. But you've also, there's a lot of tech and IT and AI stuff going off in California, and Texas. Obviously, you got raw material. So like there are three big like financial heavyweights in America. But Washington D.C. is the capital, and that's where the power actually gets wielded from. So, I don't see that as being a model that we can't.
No, and I think there are some things that, people who actually have been criticising Burnham for saying, well, he's organised a few buses, but wait until he has to organise a national budget. But actually, if his answer for organising a few buses is actually to enhance local powers in that regard, and they're happy with what he did on a local scale, there is a proof of concept for sort of locally being in charge of some things, like transport infrastructure, for example.
Well, let's see. I mean, it seems to me that every attempt to sort of bring some kind of devolution about has resulted in responsibility being devolved, but power and finance remaining exactly where it sits at the moment, which is with Westminster. It may be that this model of his will work, but it could just be he creates another court for himself in Manchester, and nothing happens to change the relationship between the rest of the country and Westminster.
Yeah. I think if you don't empower devolved administrations or local authorities or mayoralties or whatever it is, if you don't empower them to have proper leverage over Westminster in terms of budget setting, right? Because this is, adult social care is a prime example. Yeah. It's discussed in a national context as a national problem, but it's delivered locally, and the delivery is hamstrung by the fact that those people who are delivering it locally are constrained by budgets that are largely set elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where devolution has always been about handing responsibility down, but actually holding power back. And that's the thing that needs to change. Now, if Andy Burnham's able to do that, if he's able to give more genuine power to these devolved authorities, then that would be a very positive step in the right direction. But I can't actually see it happening. I can't see the Treasury, for one, being prepared to allow that to occur.
Yeah, I was literally about to say the power ultimately lies in Treasury, doesn't it? Because if Treasury doesn't give the money, then it doesn't matter if you can, theoretically build a bridge. If you don't have the money to pay anybody to build it, you can't do it, can you? So
that's right, and that seems to me the sticking point with all of these models. And in terms of things like devolving power to police and crime commissioners, for example, I think they're just a safety valve. That when the public are dissatisfied with their policing in their area, what do? They're advised to vote for a different police and crime commissioner. There's this expectation that when this individual's elected, there'll be a transformation in policing in Lincolnshire or wherever it may be. And of course
that's nonsense.
Of course, that doesn't happen. What happens is the public just get very frustrated and they wait for the next opportunity to vote somebody out and vote somebody back in again on the promise that they'll do something about the problem. I mean, you can see that mirrored, for example, in when all the political parties' attitude towards potholes. Every political party always uses potholes locally as the sort of the benchmark for what they're going to do when they get into power. And what actually changes? Nothing.
And why doesn't it change? Are local government budgets constrained to the point where they couldn't deploy the resources even if they wanted to?
Yeah.
Right. Because effectively they get into, like Boston Borough Council, and find basically all of the money you've got is already accounted for.
Yeah.
The efficiency savings you think that you can achieve, we've all thought about this before, and they're not there.
Yeah.
You're pretty much going to have to stick with the status quo unless you've got a magic money tree.
Yeah, I don't think it applies just to Boston Council. I think it applies to all councils all over the country. The vast majority of the funding that goes into local councils comes from central government. There's an opportunity to raise some finance, obviously through council taxation, but you're constrained by what your communities can bear to pay. Yeah.
But then that doesn't always mean that, councils make good decisions with the money they have. I mean, take Lincolnshire County Council, for instance. We have half a bridge outside Spalding and half a bridge outside Grantham. They didn't think to create a whole bridge outside one of them. They decided to do 2 useless half bridges.
Yeah. Maybe they're like skateboarding.
It was
well, no, because you can't even have fun on them because they've gated
them
off.
Yeah.
They spent hundreds of thousands of pounds gating them off so you can't use them.
Yeah.
So after spending millions of pounds, it's just
it's a white elephant, as they would call it.
Yeah,
in the old days.
I genuinely don't understand how they've managed to run out of money twice on building a road. It's just pathetic.
Well, they don't know how to budget set, do they?
Well, this is a point actually which in preparation for today, I did want to talk about in the context of this proposed, I don't know what to call it, devolution Mark II, or let's just call it Manchesterism, right?
Yeah.
It was pointed out on the latest Private Eye podcast that, of course, what's been announced is delegation of power, and you would hope more funding down to a more local level. Maybe, yeah. But in 2015, the Cameron government got rid of the Audit Commission. So at the moment, local councils and borough councils audit themselves in terms of their spending, because they have an internal audit.
That doesn't sound like a recipe for
I know,
disaster at all.
So they have an internal audit committee, right? Yeah. So the only people checking up on local government spending
is local government.
Oh, well, local government and one guy at Private Eye.
Right.
So, basically you have to read the Rotten Boroughs column, and that's accountability for local government expenditure.
Right.
Then that's the top and bottom of it, effectively.
Right.
And now I realise that, the audit committees in various local authorities are, going to be spitting their tea out as I speak, right?
Yeah.
But, look, if you won't let me mark my own homework, I sure as hell aren't going to let you.
Yeah. Well, they do have external auditors go in. So I mean, by getting rid of the Audit Commission, what local authorities now have to do is go to Lazars or one of these big sort of
the accountancy firms that famously have not failed in their audit responsibilities over the last 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Enron.
But that's basically the model. That's basically
okay. So more expenditure as well, because
it doesn't come cheap.
A Big Four accountancy firm, even actually a large regional accountancy firm, is not cheap. By any means, especially not for audit.
No,
because audit's one of those. We call it a distress purchase. You have to buy this, and therefore it is far less price sensitive because you've got to buy it. I mean, not that large regional accountancy or Big Four accountancy firms are famous for their cheap prices anyway, but I don't know. I just feel like that.
I mean, you'd use the phrase "marking your own homework," I suppose, if you were being very cynical about it, wouldn't you?
Well, I am extremely cynical. I'm extremely cynical ordinarily, and then when you add on local government, I'm even more cynical. Right?
I don't think you need to. I don't think that's cynical at all, because they are literally marking their own homework. I mean, if you're buying somebody in to mark your homework for you, you're still marking your own homework, aren't you? I mean, it's...
Well, because actually the people, they are employing these people to scrutinise the financial records that they've kept themselves, right? As opposed to working with the Audit Commission, who will come in, I would have hoped, on a slightly more independent basis. But presumably this was a cost-cutting measure. But this is exactly the kind of...
It was the bonfire. It was the bonfire of the Quangos.
Do you remember why they did that?
Bonfire of the Quangos, yeah.
Oh, so it was just to get rid of a Quango, basically.
Yeah, let's save all the money we're spending on this Quango, which was checking to make sure that people weren't building half bridges.
Right,
wasting loads of money.
or like that. Was it the Reform chap at Nottingham who decided we need to spend money on monitoring East Midlands Airport for UFOs or something?
Oh, really? Oh, nice.
That's a good spend.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the council.
Not really bothered about UFOs. I think we do with a bit more intervention. Really. I mean, if they'd like to come down and give us teleporters, I don't think anybody would have a problem.
I mean, in relation to this issue, I think Croydon sort of were able to mess up, weren't they, quite spectacularly, because they weren't getting proper assurance and proper auditing done by their external auditors. Things were being signed off that, quite frankly, were about to bankrupt the council, I think, and I think it was Croydon.
I think Croydon got in trouble, and then
somebody else did as well.
I've just referred to rotten boroughs. I don't think I've managed not now to repeat some of their more juicy stories about awarding options to buy development land back for £1 an acre is one of the ones they go on quite a lot. Yeah, so
can I buy this land for £1?
No.
Damn it.
No, because you're not a favoured developer of whichever local authority it was.
How does one do that?
Well, do
you need to make donations to somebody?
I think you have to have been married to a county councillor for a few years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mike.
Sorry, Dan.
I mean, okay, balance. Local authority and local councillors, district council, borough do a lot of very good work on very tight budgets.
I'll endorse that. Absolutely.
So I'm not just slamming all local politicians all of the time. However, if they do award preferential contracts to their mates on terms that are, blatantly uncommercial, then
they should
absolutely. I'm coming for them. Well, I'm not.
Hopefully someone is. Somebody is. Yeah.
That's never happened in my experience.
Enthusiastically cheer it on.
So I think it was a South Lincolnshire councillor, wasn't it, who went to prison for something like that about 15 years ago. Sold a field to a developer because a road was going to go through it or something, or moved a boundary so that had a boundary move so that that the road would go through his field, and of course it increased the value of the field.
Right. And
he was eventually caught and sentenced to custody for that. So yeah, these things do go on, but I think it's vanishingly rare. I'd like to think so anyway. And it's certainly never happened in any authority that I've been involved with.
Going back to the point I was making about Andy Burnham, though, I mean, my issue with promising more devolution is more or less everybody promises greater power for local regions when they want to get into power, and then they get into power, and then they go, well, that's going to be very. I mean, there is an interesting article in the FT this morning about essentially why this never works, and it's that as soon as you promise to devolve power to somewhere, everybody else hates you. So by this creating this, I mean, Burnham's quite interesting because he came from, like, I can't remember the name of it. It's Chelmsley or something like that. But it's basically a kind of a towny village somewhere in between Manchester and Liverpool. It's not in that kind of, upper middle class belt around Manchester. It's just like a normal place in between the two. So he's not really a Manc and he's not really a Scouse. He's kind of somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so like him occupying this like King of the North style thing to lord over the two is quite interesting given where he's from. But like if he does decide that he wants to make Manchester a seat of power in the UK, well, Newcastle are not going to like that. Lincoln are not going to like that. Birmingham ain't going to like it. Norwich ain't going to like it. London, of course, will hate it. Do you know what I mean? You've got all of these other regional, like Wales and Scotland won't. Well, Scotland might like it actually because they don't like London. But
I think the feeling's mutual, to be honest with you.
I think the fundamental problem is that when you enlarge the administration or devolve powers, the expectation is that where you're devolving them to, there is some shrinkage in where you've devolved them from.
Yeah.
And that's something that never happens, and it is never likely to happen. So, I just think, we need to sort of think sensibly about this, that if you're going to give more power to Manchester for the north, then there's got to be a corresponding shrinkage in the amount of power exercised by Westminster in the south.
Yes.
And that's
obviously,
the hurdle that these projects never seem to get over.
Yeah.
How do you negotiate what is essentially a very, very complicated transfer of not only responsibility but finance and power?
Yeah.
Impossible, in my opinion, to do that.
You're still not voting for Burnham then?
I'm just a watching brief, I'm afraid.
It's a watching brief.
As it is with all politicians, I'm afraid I don't really like party politics, as you probably know. I prefer people politics rather than party politics. I'll keep an eye on what's happening, but I don't feel optimistic he's going to transform anything whatsoever, apart from his own reputation, which I guess...
I think he's already done that. He's done quite well with that, I think.
He's done all right burnishing his reputation. Let's see how long it lasts.
Anyway, Mike, you wanted to talk about a report.
I wanted to talk about the report that was published earlier this week on working class outcomes in education and how they are disproportionately worse than outcomes for virtually every other ethnic group.
White working class.
White working
kids.
class. WWC. Now, one of the things that this report highlighted was that there needs to be a definition of white working class, and obviously this is an important thing. If you want to deal with white working class underperformance, you've first of all got to define what you mean by the white working class. I mean, as somebody who is basically kind of a bit working class, I tend to think that we're not talking about the white working class. We're talking about the white welfare class. So I think we're talking about those people who have become, if you like,
they define
the victims of what you might describe as the obsession with kind of globalising the British economy. These are the people who years ago would have worked in local factories, in local farms, worked on the land, who now find themselves dispossessed of those jobs and those opportunities, and find themselves basically having the role of consumer, living on welfare. And I think they are the people who are struggling to perform, to succeed in the education system. But my point, I guess, is to sort of throw it open to the debate. Is policy likely to change this when fundamentally I think it's about relationships, particularly relationships between communities and the state that governs them? I mean,
it's interesting because to me, I remember being told about the fact that we've got to do something to correct systemic injustice and all the rest when I was at grammar school.
Yeah, so this is going on for years.
Quite some time ago now. And I remember Mark Simmons, who was the MP, coming in to do a thing at the school about, diversity and all that. And I remember just being sat there in the library having this debate, and I remember just sat there thinking, well, yeah, but if you re-engineer the system so it positively advances the futures of these categories of people. So we've carved up society. We've decided we're going to put some effort into these people. Eventually, over time, they will overtake everybody else because they're getting more attention, right? And they're getting more attention in terms of additional support, additional staff helping them get through schooling. Maybe that might feature into recruitment, and then eventually, over time, there will be the ones that society is geared in favour of because, well, that's what the system's doing, and it's doing that for a genuinely noble reason. But I think reading this report, they're making the same mistake again. They're saying, well, here's another group of society that need a bit more support, so we need to do what we've done for everybody else.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking, well, actually, was that approach to fixing systemic prejudice the wrong one?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to have been considered.
I just wonder whether or not education policy on its own is sufficient to change that situation for the white welfare stroke working class communities in our country. It seems to me that what's disadvantaged those people are wider economic and political changes that go far beyond education to correct. But as usual, a bunch of middle class sort of academics and people sit down and try and come up with a way of solving this problem. But rather than looking at it in the broadest possible context, they focus specifically on education. So, for example, let's start by defining what we mean by white working class. Then we must sort of like help teachers relate to that class better than they currently appear to be relating to them. You know, let's deal with the fact there's a reduced literacy. So it's all about kind of KPIs and policy outcomes and process within schools. For me, it's a far, far bigger picture.
I agree and disagree. So I agree that there's a bigger picture, and I'm going to come on to that with a point I think you'll like. But I do think there is an education policy piece of work to do here. My take on this report, actually, was that it fed into other reporting in the media this week in terms of trends within education. And the reporting I'm talking about is some rumbling and grumbling from parents' groups about the increasing use of isolation and a low threshold for exclusion as a discipline policy in schools.
Yeah.
And there's been a trend amongst educational influencers, like the country's strictest headmistress and people like that, to advocate for very disciplinarian policies in school. It's not necessarily wrong to be disciplinarian, but for those policies to be delivered in a particular way, which is you take disruptive students out of the class very quickly, you classify as disruptive very trivial behaviour. So it's the broken windows theory, whatever, guddling your pencil case or, a little bit of cheek is immediately sanctioned, and you have a very tight uniform. Having an untucked shirt or being a minute and a half late gets you consequences. So you set the bar for consequences very low. You exclude very quickly, and you're very strict. And the way the exclusion works is they put these children into isolation rooms and basically make them stare at the wall. And this is justified by education influencers on the basis that the education of the well-behaved masses is far too important for it to be disrupted by this cohort of naughty pupils.
Who we're basically just going to abandon.
Who we're going to lock in a room and make stare at a wall, right? Yeah. And the BBC article I was reading, referred to a child who'd been in an in-school exclusion. I think it was nearly 50 times during the school year, so 50 school days across the year. He'd not been being educated. He'd been sat in a punishment room.
So that's literally like a quarter of the days
of
the year.
Basically in solitary isolation, not getting educated. And the reason why this relates to your report is, of course, that the cohort of pupils who are most likely to be excluded
from the white working class
are this cohort, the free school meals children, effectively. And so I do think there's an educational policy piece, because when we move to academisation, on a large scale, the idea was that you'd make a lot of decisions around running a school a bit more commercial and business-like. And fine, if we're buying in pencil sharpeners and printers and all that kind of stuff, I absolutely do think a school should operate in the same way as a business, right? It should procure its stuff in a business-like manner, i.e., as cheaply as an...
Yeah, but that's just to advocate getting rid of ESPO, basically. Or similar, whatever.
But what I don't agree with is that you should educate like you're building a Model T Ford. And we just talked about this last week, a KPI target-driven education system, where you're effectively saying, well, educating a child is like, a production line. It hasn't demonstrated the holistic outcomes that we wanted it to.
And also, like, you look at education in general, and this is a problem, obviously. The report does highlight an actual problem that lots of people have been talking about for years, and finally somebody's got some evidence that people can actually listen to. So, hurrah for the report. Sorry, just for a sec. But going back to the problem with education is, I was talking to one of my teachers the other day. He just highlighted they haven't changed the curriculum since I was at school. So what Alex and I, we're the same age, were taught in school is literally what they're teaching nowadays. And it's just, most of it's not relevant anymore. Like, who cares about the Tudors and the Stuarts? Like, they're not educating kids about Brexit, which is like one of the most important, expressions of the democratic will in this country, and it's so interesting in terms of like the implication and the debate and all this. But that's not being taught in schools at all, and it's one of the most important things that's happened in this country.
I mean, I personally don't think, I mean, whether you teach about Brexit, I mean, you should teach generally about democracy and how our democracy was created and where the origins of it come from, and maybe how we can evolve it so that it becomes more democratic and becomes more accountable to more people. But essentially, in relation to this particular item, I pick up your point about excluded, generally sort of excluded male, white, working class, students. I mean, there does seem to be this trend towards what you might call utilitarianism, if you like, ensuring the greatest happiness of the greatest number. And we all know that Jeremy Bentham's penal policy was quite oppressive, sort of keeping people with the Bible trapped in a sort of small booth where they only had themselves to sort of like reflect upon, and they had the word of God in their hands, sort of thing. So I mean, this is a trend that we've been down before in the 18th century, which is bizarre that we're seeing it echoed again here in the 21st. But I just want to make the point that for me, what's the wider context for these individuals? And I think, what we don't want, we're putting all the emphasis on educators, all the emphasis on policy, all the emphasis on KPIs. But actually, what about looking at the number of broken homes there are?
Okay, so this was the second part.
Going into the sort of the areas where traditionally policymakers really don't want to stray. I'll just finish by telling you a little story, and I will be quiet. When I was on the county council back in 2000 and whenever it was, I sat on the Children and Young Persons Committee, and we were having a presentation by some mental health professionals who deal with children with emerging mental health problems. And I asked the question, how many of these children who've got mental health issues have come from single parent households? Because I was a single parent at the time, and there was this general look of horror amongst all these officers and these people from the mental health NHS, and they asked me the question, well, why are you asking, Councillor Gilbert? So I said, well, I'm asking because as a single parent myself, I find it very, very hard balancing being a parent who's got the responsibility for caring for the child with the responsibility of disciplining them and all that sort of thing. It's a hard balancing act, and of course I have to employ sort of people to come in and look after the children when I'm at work. And they just looked at me and said, we don't consider those factors to be relevant to any of our families. We just class families as families, regardless of the composition of them. So it was a bit of a slap down for me, but it made me think, well, that's ridiculous, because this is clearly a factor that should be considered when you're looking at the establishment of advantage and disadvantage amongst families. The vast majority of white, welfare dependent children, I would suspect, come from families that have multiple challenges. Let's be polite about it. Multiple challenges. And it's those challenges that need to be considered, and what social policy decisions have been made that have created the circumstances in which these problems occur. I've written.
Well, I have a solution which I think would line up with the things that you like. I got a bit carried away with my personal bugbear of KPIs in education,
and they are a problem.
Second bugbear, this discipline policy, which let's sacrifice education in exchange for control. But I did mean to move on to a follow-up point, which is I think that's necessary, an educational policy piece, but I also do think there's a wider community piece. And I've got another my own anecdote. So I'm on the committee of a charity in my village, which maintains the play park, right, where the swings and the grass are. Now, quite why there isn't just a play park in the village which is maintained from local government funds, I don't know, but whatever. Ours is a charity, and we've been reviewing our constitution. And on the back of the Constitution, it says, the members of the committee have made up, blah, 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 and also the following organisations are entitled to appoint someone onto your committee. The netball club, the tennis club, the bowls club, and the football club, right? Guess how many of the netball, tennis, bowls, and football club in, New Leek still exist?
Zero.
Exactly. It's a big fat zero, right? And this is from 1987. So in 1987, there were 4 amateur sports clubs in the village.
In New Leek.
Which
has
is
a population of...
I mean, it's a road and a half, sorry. And actually, in terms of the wider picture, well, aspiration and advancement aren't things that are delivered in a PowerPoint to teenage children. they come from socialising with people
Yeah.
who aren't their families. They come from the village, you know. They come from, I play on the football team and I have a good relationship with my coach, you know. One of my other players' dads or mums gives me a lift to the games, and they happen to be a teacher, right? Whereas, so let's say my parents are unemployed. And it's that effect of being surrounded by possibility and opportunities. Equally, you know, this kid wants work experience somewhere, you know, and it's, you know, it's whoever it is, little Jeremy from the football club or from the hockey club or whatever it is, and then, you know, someone will twist someone's arm within that sort of community, and it's you can't dictate that from on high.
No. I think that's really important, a really interesting point, because I've just written down here in my notepad, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And that's almost a universally understood principle that you hear all over the world. And I think what's happened in the West in particular, and certainly in my experience with that white welfare-dependent kind of community, is it's hard to raise a child as a stressed-out single parent, regardless of how much money the state feels you're entitled to get from the welfare benefit system. And I think for me, it's much more about the government's, again, a bit like with education, looking at the responsibility of the education sector to tackle this problem. It's also not about giving people who are single parents more and more and more money, because that actually might be counterproductive. What these children need is exactly as you say. It's a much wider network of social and cultural support, and they don't get it.
Well, it's like your exclusion point. I mean, feeds into this really nicely, because, you know, one of the things that you need to learn as a child growing up is conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And if you're literally, your only example of adults resolving conflict is to tell people to get out.
Yeah.
That reduces your resilience massively, because you don't know how to be in rooms with people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
Because quite a lot of those, I'm presuming a lot of those behavioural things are somebody having a bit of a snipe at the teacher, and then, or maybe even sometimes just disagreeing with them, and
or
you know,
not disagreeing with them in a respectful enough way.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a common meme on like Facebook and TikTok about, you know, the parents saying, "Oh, my child's been told by their teacher that 1 divided by 0 is 0," which it isn't. Obviously, you can't divide anything by 0. It's a nonsense concept. And I've written to the head teacher, and the head teacher agrees with the teacher, so I don't know what to do now. You know, neither of them really understand maths at all. That would be a behavioural thing, because the teacher would be telling the child, no, it's 0, and the child's like, no, you can't divide anything by 0. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
How many nothings are in something? It's a ridiculous question.
Exactly.
You know, so
and
that would be, well, get out. You're being disruptive to the lesson, and actually, like, well, you're just teaching kids to. Whenever you find somebody who doesn't agree with you, just tell them to go into a different room, or you go into a different room. Don't talk to them.
It doesn't help
silo.
It doesn't help a child learn how to behave pro-socially,
like
just by shutting them away. It is completely the wrong policy, but it's simple, it's straightforward, it's understandable, and it's the drift towards
standardisation.
It's this drift towards standardisation and sort of becoming slightly more authoritarian.
Also, ironically, it's highly childish, just stamping your feet and saying no, get out. That is the most childish response to any debate you can possibly have.
It also disempowers the teachers, right? Because if the teachers are subject to effectively a very formulaic approach to classroom discipline, now, look, managing a room full of kids is something I wouldn't want to attempt.
Oh, God, no.
You know? But what I would like is to support teachers to be professionals and to adopt their own approaches to doing that, rather than having it completely standardised and formulaic, because that de-skills them and it undermines their worth as professionals.
Are you talking about the curriculum in general?
I'm talking,
because
I wasn't, but in this particular case, it does apply to the curriculum,
The general educational we could go on about this all day, because general policy is to deprofessionalise professions for some reason, because they're seen as too expensive. And that's like...
I think actually it does go back to something about, you know, it takes a village to raise a child, and how do we do this? There's an obsession with a measurable outcome from any intervention you make. But actually, if you've ever been a gardener, right, you can obsess about the end result, you know, to the nth degree of your apple tree. To the point where you grow it in a cordon and you trim off all the side shoots, right, and you deform this tree so that it's exactly pointing directly south, and it's along a wire, and you feed it with a load of fertiliser and all that kind of stuff. And you end up with a mangled-looking stick that may or may not be producing apples, and you might, you know, and might be producing loads of apples, right? that's where the obsession with the end result gets you. But if you want a nice looking garden, you just have to contribute to the fundamentals by keeping it well maintained, watered, plant trees that are going to grow eventually to provide shade to other things. Encourage symbiotic relationships to develop by putting things next to each other that are going to, in 3 or 4 years' time, cooperate with each other and be good for each other. Yeah. And then you have to sort of sit back and trust.
You know what? I've actually got actual experience at that from rugby coaching, because at the start of the season we had 2 kids who really should be getting on. Like if I got these 2 lads playing together nicely, they're going to score loads of tries. Like you know what I mean? They're both very good players. And they both hated each other because they both thought they were competing with each other. Yeah. Like if anybody knows rugby, they're going to end up probably being 2 centres, right? And one's going to be a 12, one's going to be a 13. And to those of you who don't know rugby, that's like a natural partnership in rugby. It's a bit like in football, you have your 2 central midfielders. They
should be mates.
They should be best mates. And I told them they should be best mates at the start of the year. And if they were, they'd score tries for fun. By the end of the season, we'd managed to put those 2 things together in a symbiotic relationship. They're now best mates, and they're scoring tries for fun. So that's how you don't resolve conflict with kids who hate each other by separating them. You shove them together and tell them to be friends, and then they will.
And you don't solve complex problems by chasing outcomes. No. Yeah. You fix the basic fundamentals, and you trust that it will grow into it's like happiness, If you chase happiness, you'll never find it. But if you exercise regularly, eat healthily, try to avoid things that are really bad for you, cultivate a community around you, help out in society, and do all of these other things, you tend to end up happy as a result.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
I think that what we're getting at is that the whole process within education and broadly within the public sector in general has been modelled, if you like, over the last, say, 30 years or so on the commercial sector. And so, the commercial sector has outcomes in relation to profit, but you can't clearly have profit in something like education or in policing or in how you manage
it's just an obsession with KPIs.
So you have these KPIs, and these KPIs operate as a kind of a sort of form of profitability, a way of measuring the success of the organisation, of ensuring that its reputation remains intact, so that strategic decisions are based on maintaining that reputation, hitting those targets and all that sort of thing. And what that does, and I guess it would be interesting to talk to teachers about this, whether that has the effect of taking all the creativity, which is what you're talking about, Dan, out of the education system. A lot of people that I know who have left education left because they felt that the creativity had gone, that their personal style of teaching didn't fit with the
standardised
approach to delivering education. And I think it's a root and branch problem across the whole public sector. And creativity's gone.
And coming back to this report, and this is why this report's suggestions won't work, because their suggestions are we need to gather more data, do more intervention, and essentially do the thing that we did before, which has caused the problems that we've got.
Create more targets and then measure them.
We're going to get laughed at and dismissed by policymakers, because they're going to say, well, look, where's the evidence for what you're saying, and how do we measure your success? I think the basic argument I'm making is go and look for your evidence in systems that you have seen working well. So if there's somewhere else, and people talk about the Scandi countries quite a lot, or whatever it happens to be, it doesn't have to be them. Go find somewhere where it's working well. Have a check to see whether the conditions of it working well there are strongly related to that specific case and therefore not generalizable, right? And then put those conditions in place. That's your evidence base. And how will we measure the outcomes? Well, believe me, in 5 or 10 years' time, you will know whether your schools are better. We go ask a parent in this area to name the schools in the local area in order of what the best schools are.
But also, I think
they know.
Well, and also to the policymakers who say, well, where's your evidence of outcomes, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you look at maths attainment of people in Britain, not at the end of school, actually, but at the age of 25, i.e. a decent time after school has happened, out of the G20, we're 19th, with America being 20th. So whatever the policymakers have done for the past 20 years, they've cocked up.
Right? I think the evidence of white welfare or working class failure is the KPI that we can use to counter their argument that their system actually works. Because along with what you just said there, Dan, clearly this educational model of KPIs, process, procedure, curriculum, fixations, and taking away some of the creativity and the flexibility for teachers isn't working. Well, but I also think the wider context needs to be considered as well. It isn't just about education. If these kids don't see themselves getting a job that pays for a mortgage which gives them the life that they want, then they're going to be disengaging very, very early on in that process. And that could explain why so many of them, are ill-disciplined and what's the word, dysregulated. They just don't see any point in being in education.
This is white working class. This is the majority of the country. 1 in 6 kids. These are the backbone of the economy in future. These are going to be our future labourers and bricklayers and builders and whatever. These salt of the earth people. These are the ones that the real economy is actually based on.
Or they're going to be our welfare-dependent cases who simply perpetuate the same problems that we're experiencing and we're discussing at the moment. I mean, we've got to break. We
fix it.
We've got to fix it. And I don't think that coming up with policies is necessarily the right answer. I mean, in my day when I went to school, and I'm old, that's exactly the measure that you use to sort of determine whether a school was a good school or a bad school. It was just generally, your GCSE GCE. Results and how happy the kids were and what the place felt like as an institution to be part of.
Well, actually, looking at the report, I mean that was one of the interesting data points. Actually, parents were asked, "What does your child being successful mean to you?" And so, being happy. Most parents wanted their kids to be happy. Weirdly, non-white working class were at the lowest, quite significantly. Doing something they enjoy, non-white working class were 51% cared about that. 68% for white working class and 67% for white middle class, 62% for non-white middle class. So that kind of outcome, I think that still is the priority, essentially, for, according to this, for white people in this country. Yeah. I'm not sure whether it's different for non-white. I don't know how different that 67 and 62% really is.
But does the model that they're deploying to sort of deliver education encourage that level of happiness, if you like, amongst students? I mean, I don't know whether we create an environment which is too competitive.
Well, I think doing something they enjoy. You need to be doing something.
Yeah, of course.
You can't just be sat at home on benefits. That's not doing something. Yeah. So, the priority still is for people to go out and get a job and, have a fulfilling life. I think for the vast majority of all parents.
Within the reality of an economy that they can see as they get older, possibly isn't going to deliver that for them. I think that's fundamentally, it's a big holistic problem that doesn't just relate to education. It relates to social policy more broadly, but also Britain's place in the world economically. We talked about sort of having globally employable people in this country last week, didn't we? And I just think we're setting the bar too low, really, and we're not making people happy, and we're not getting the educational outcomes that we want. You've referred to mathematics. I mean, it's appalling, really, what's happening there.
Anyway, shall we move on to something else?
Yeah.
I read an interesting bit in the FT about how the administration in America is making it very difficult to work out where to invest money, because America historically, so globally, America is 60% of the global stock market. So if you add up all the companies in the world that you can buy by value, 60% of that value is in America. Yeah. So America are the majority of the stock markets globally. So, naturally, people have very heavy allocations to America. So everybody's got big amounts of money. Even if you've got a tiny pension, a big chunk of it will be invested in the American stock markets. And America traditionally has had a very kind of well-defined legal system with well-defined boundaries and da-da-da-da. Now, currently, there's a chap called Donald who's pushing them... past breaking point, I think most people would argue. And that's making it really, really difficult for investors to work out, well, actually, do you take a risk as an investor and just look at all the things that Donald Trump's investing in and just put your money in there, knowing that there's probably some, corruption going on, which is why it's going to do quite well? Or, what do you... how do you deal with that, and how do you examine this system that's always been incredibly rules-based, and now... Most of the rules don't seem to apply. What do you do about that?
Well, globally, what Trump has done, and specifically in relation to this, is create an unexpected level of chaos, hasn't he? which means that you're constantly trying to second guess, some of these issues, like what's his next move going to be, whether or not the situation with Iran has given him the sort of the slap that he probably required, and actually brought him back into line a little bit, because he's embarked on a project which he's clearly failed to deliver on and created absolute global chaos. Whether he's learning his lessons from that, we've yet to see. But certainly, I think that for the first couple of years of his presidency, he was just basically the toddler stamping around the room, making as much noise and creating as much chaos as possible, and disturbing everything that was going on around him, including the stock exchanges, I suppose.
It's a bit tricky, because I was going to offer the boring old truism that business and finance like certainty.
Yeah.
They like predictability. It comes back to the UK. You talk about the bond market. I don't believe the bond market is as political as the media would have us believe. I don't think they really take a view on real political issues. I think they just like to know what's coming. And they like what's coming to be predictable. And now this is where their politics has to come into it. From their point of view, reasonably sensible or arguably sensible, not so unsensible that the wheels are going to come off, because that gets you back to unpredictability, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a financial advisor who runs portfolios for clients, I meet them. And that's broadly true. They just want stuff to sound like somebody's thought it through.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to see that there is, somebody has thought about the economics of this, and somebody has thought about, making sure that Britain can repay its debts long term. And that's coming back to what we're talking about in terms of America. There is a concern. Well, actually, what happens if this Project 2025 actually does play off? Because he's looked at what Putin did to take over Russia. He's sort of trying to do the same thing. And one of the things that Putin did in 1998 was default on Russia's national debt. Now, Russia can't borrow any money now, because nobody will lend them. Well, barely anybody will lend them any money. Their debt GDP level is about 25%, because that's as much as anybody will lend them. But what if Trump does that? That would be absolute. You think 2008's bad? If that happens,
chaos.
Yeah,
absolutely. Off.
What all these organisations in finance need, though, whether it's the bond market or the stock exchange, they want assurance, don't they? That's the phrase I think they use. They want to be assured that everything is going to be sort of business as usual.
Yeah, they want to get their interest.
And we're sat here saying business as usual has not been working for the last 20 years.
No.
And I think, I certainly come from the point of view that I am cynical about politics and the ability of politicians to affect real change, because I do not think that they are being radical enough.
No, exactly. I totally agree with that.
And I think that's a popular sentiment, actually.
Yeah.
Now, what brand of radicalism you then opt for is...
But I think
many are available.
Yeah, exactly, right.
But I think people are crying out for something that is radical, that speaks to them about their lived experience, to use that horrible phrase that a lot of people would deploy, but to explain their lived experience, to explain why things don't seem to work for them. And unfortunately, the party political system is still looking after political parties. It's not actually looking after the country or the people of the country. It's not looking after the nation. So we've now got a situation, a phrase I've coined, which is the political parties are using the state to adversely affect the nation. And we need to sort of expose that, I think, and then have a sensible conversation about doing something about it. Because I agree with you 100%.
It's like Keir's resignation. I mean, that was just to protect the party, wasn't it? I mean, because if Keir stays till the next general election, Labour will lose.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the long and the short.
And who cares about what happens to the party?
Which is why he resigned. Because if you listen to his resignation speech, and I think all those facts are true, he has actually done quite a lot of good in the last couple of years. He's just not messaged it particularly well.
Yeah.
So actually, arguably, he should probably stay. But he's decided to put the party first and resign.
Yeah, putting the party first. So regardless of what the needs of the country might be and how good he could be in delivering sort of policies that benefit ordinary people, he's got to go because there's a more attractive man on the scene.
Because he's not popular.
Because he's not popular, and they want somebody else who's more charismatic. That's looking, as you say, it's looking after the interests of the Labour Party, looking after the interests of the Labour Party at the next general election. It's all short-termism, and it's actually undermining this country at a a breathtaking extent.
But at least at least we're not America. They're even worse. I always cling on to that because it's like when we look at people throwing little bits of Nigel Farage getting £5 million from this dome. Is like to us it's a massive story, but you look at politicians in America getting $5 million every now and again. It's it's almost it's fairly common. Donald Trump settled over $1 billion to himself. I mean, he's just
this scale's absolutely steaming. I'm sorry, it makes me absolutely furious. It really does. I just can't stand grift, and I just think it's gross.
Yeah,
where are their mothers? If I had £5 million quid stuffed in my back pocket by a crypto billionaire who lived in Thailand, right? And I was on the Today programme saying it was none of anyone's business. I think my dear old mum would be the first one to call in, say, Alexander,
you've been a very naughty boy.
Why are you lying? We raised you better than that.
Because to be honest, I don't know why he wasn't honest about that.
Yeah.
Because if he'd have just said, he gave me loads of money to promote cryptocurrency, but I think it's a good idea anyway. I don't think his fans would have batted an eyelid. And I don't think anybody would have really cared about that.
But again, he's thinking of his reputation, personal reputation, isn't he? He's thinking about the party. He's thinking about the optics of all that.
But he wants to be Trump.
He's not being honest, though.
Trump's good at styling it out, which is basically just saying, of course I've done something wrong, but I did it wrong for the right reasons. That's the line Trump goes for. But I don't know why Farage...
Yeah, well,
tries to preserve this veneer of decency.
Because he wants to preserve the interests of reform. And that's where I think, again, party politics is the problem. Binary politics, attack and defend politics, is problematic. But when you mix parties into that as well, I think it becomes even more toxic. And then you put in the need of politicians to sort of self-aggrandize, and you've got the most horrendous system possible for governing anywhere.
If they really did take power away from Westminster... So not just devolve responsibility down to a more local level, whether it's mayors or local authorities, but do so by taking some powers away from Westminster. And I'll say, I think there are some things that have to be organised centrally. I think defence is one of them, for example. That's got to be centralised, right?
Yeah, water.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, we've privatised it all.
Yeah, but
only country in the world to do so, by the way. But,
brilliant. But if they managed it, there is actually a nice cynical political play to be had. The political parties don't need to cease to exist, right? Because once they've successfully properly devolved power down to the regions, right, they can carry on with these popularity contests. And anytime anyone asks an awkward question about transport, right, or education, or local health outcomes, they can say, well, you have to take that up with the Mayor of Manchester. Right?
Yeah.
Just like we used to do with Europe. Because anytime anyone, got challenged politically whilst we were in Europe, the Conservative answer was, it's the EU, they're making us do this. And it was always a lie because the EU were asking them to write, directives or regulations and implement them locally. So the implementation was always done by Brits, right?
Yeah.
But anytime anyone didn't like it, it was blamed on the EU. Yeah. And you can do the reverse of that. If you're a politician, you can run a popularity contest, and get elected on the fact that, you go down a zip line or you wear short shorts and carry on with that, If you devolve power down to the regions, you can always blame them for stuff going wrong.
But I think that it's the nature of party politics that simply doesn't deliver, in my opinion. The fact that parties are having these beauty contests, the fact that people get elected into office because their party is on an uptick and other parties are on a downward spiral, is not right. You're not getting people who are genuinely talented or able to deliver on behalf of the public. You're getting party hacks who are in power because someone likes the look of them. And for me, that's the worst kind of politics. The worst kind of politics is party politics. And I think, we need as a country to start being much more cynical about how adversely party politics is affecting our country. To use your analogy, if you did devolve and you still had the party political system, it would still be a bun fight with people making accusations about incompetence across some kind of chamber, and nothing fundamentally would change. We've got to get collaboration built into our politics and not this ludicrous party-based competition.
Personally, I'd ban parties at a local level, but I appreciate that's.
I wouldn't ban anything.
Probably impractical, and
I wouldn't ban anything. What I would do as an early starter with this process would take the party logos off of ballot papers and just have the name, because you vote for the person, you don't vote for the party.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite effective.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note, we're about out of time. Thank you very much for listening, and remember to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and see you again next week.